very easy to go into a market forces versus regulation discussion, which we'll have another day.
Sure.
One of the backgrounds to Brexit has very much been about securing our borders, and concerns have obviously been heightened due to multiple incidents on the EU mainland. The building regs potentially have the ability to start to address requirements for security to be introduced, particularly in and around public buildings. Is there any thought of whether or not now would be the time to address the NATSCO guide for crowded places, for example, whether this should become an approved document to raise its awareness amongst architects?
Well, this is where I have the disadvantage of too much knowledge. The secure bit of the Act, as in sustainable and secure, was put there it's 2003 is when I drafted it, was put there at a time when burglary was a major public concern, and when it became obvious that there are no requirements in the regulations for any particular level of security. I mean, they're secure by design and other things, but it's entirely voluntary whether you buy into that and so on. At that time, I looked quite hard at what you could do, and I mean, obviously, some of the things I was looking at were, security on patio doors, basic stuff, and also having talked to crime prevention officers at that time, security of outside spaces, and there we're talking about, domestic level stuff, and something that the police would be in favour of would minimum 2-metre high fences in back gardens. Now, the interesting thing is that building regulations, funnily enough, only apply to buildings. So are fences buildings? Are patios buildings? And the answer to that is no. So the regulations actually couldn't deal with outside spaces. That would have to be dealt with a different way. So I think the answer to your question is no, because the scope of the building regulations is limited to the fabric of the building.
Sports stadia,
as I say, I know too much.
No. If we take sports stadia, for example, covered malls, places like that, shopping centres, they're all enclosed public spaces where potentially it could be extended to, because they certainly fall within the remit of the regulations. But your view is that essentially, as it stands at the moment, that there's no direct correlation between the two.
No, I mean, I'm neutral about whether it would be a good idea to have designers taking account of this. I think that would rather depend on the circumstances. I mean, if you're putting up a new building in Whitehall, it would be very sensible to. If you're putting up a new building on the Isle of Skye, it probably isn't relevant. And I mean, a small, Scotland, of course, that's Scotland, so that would be, but I don't know where you might, the Isle of Sheppey, let's say, it wouldn't be relevant unless it was next to an oil refinery. So it's very much, I think, location specific, and one of the things about the building regulations, as opposed to planning conditions, building regulations apply uniformly, and several things that people think might be a really good idea are dependent on things like wind speed and rainfall and so on, and therefore may be relevant in Kent but not very relevant in Cumbria, or vice versa. It's not best covered by building regulations. Those are the kind of things which are much better dealt with at a sub-national scale.
Arguably some lighter questions to finish, if that's okay, if we still have some time. We've heard repeatedly about the effect of EU interference in UK laws to justify Brexit throughout the whole of the discussions. In your opinion, was this actually ever a big issue when you were Building Regs Minister, and did you ever feel that you had to implement legislation to answer the EU that you wouldn't have had to do so otherwise?
Well, it's certainly true that my Conservative fellow ministers were very frustrated because they really didn't want the energy performance certificates stuff. They got themselves into a bit of a cul-de-sac about how it was pointless regulation. Although they're quite happy to have fridges labelled, they didn't really think houses should be. And I successfully won the argument that we had to do this because Europe told us to. But it's interesting that, I mean, we're very, very poor performers on energy performance certificates in this country. I mean, all buildings to which the public have access are supposed to have a certificate at the door.
Yeah.
And when did you last see a certificate at the door? And there's a deliberate neglect by the present government of that implementation. So I personally was on the side of the regulators there, because I think raising public awareness of whether their fridge is red or green is good, and for doing it for houses and whatever would be equally good.
Yep.
I'm in favour of the direction of travel, even if we diverge from European standards.
Okay. I think you've clearly answered one piece of EU legislation that some of your colleagues would like to get rid of.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can think of that you would have you'd choose to repeal?
Well, there may be some, but I'm really struggling to think what it would be. I mean, you do come across stuff which is obviously silly, and some of it is not so much about whether it's from the EU, it's from people with uncoordinated ideas. I mean, things relating to fire in conflict with things relating to mobility and access, for instance. And so you do find sometimes that a kind of a general prescription, which may or may not have started in Europe, in Brussels, can be apparently against sort of the cultural way we do things. I mean, fire is an example, because we've always taken fire very, very seriously and found it really quite difficult to build back in the idea of mobility and access. And fire prevention officers are still in denial about that. So, you know, those are the kind of things, but that's more about different professional spheres having culture clashes.
Okay. An area where I possibly have some inside knowledge that we can discuss at some other stage.
Are you a former fire prevention officer?
I am a fire engineer by qualification. I'm also on the Part B group looking at the issues relating to the use of lifts in a fire situation as well.
Okay. There
so there could be some move on that in the future. We seem to have an apparent rush to do a deal with the new president of the United States, one Donald Trump. Do you feel that there is any specific appetite to harmonise our standards with the US rather than the EU in order to get that deal done? And could we even see a return to codes based on feet and inches in order to achieve that?
Well, even I'm 74. I mean, all my time in training and on the drawing board, and no doubt now on the computer, it's been done in millimetres. If we ever went wrong, it was using millimetres, not centimetres. In all the evidence I've heard over the last couple of months, nobody has said that they want to go back to rods, poles, perches, and groats, and I don't think we need to worry.
So we don't need to concern ourselves about that. That's great. Lastly, is there anything else that you'd like to say to the AJ readership?
Well, first of all, the most important outcome of all of this is a prosperous United Kingdom, and to achieve that we need a prosperous and growing construction industry. And if your readership can do anything they can in talking to their local members of parliament or their contacts within government to make the point that this is not about special pleading for construction, it's about making sure we've got the tools to do the job of building the infrastructure and housing that the government is committed to, all the political parties are committed to, and which the citizens of the country would benefit. And if we don't get this bit right, none of that is going to happen properly.
Okay. Excellent. Just picking up on that particular point, is that a call for individuals to speak to their own local MPs, or should it be a more coordinated approach by pressing for the professional institutes to do it, or a combination of both?
I certainly think that, if you like, the corporate bit of the industry needs to put their voice forward. And I mean, there is no equivalent to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, SMMT, and that is certainly a handicap. So I would like to see a stronger, coordinated corporate voice. But as somebody who served as an MP for 18 years, I am going to be more impressed by a group of architects, say, who write to me, who are based in my constituency, than I am getting a circular letter from the RIBA.
I think that gives a very, very clear message to the readers. Thank you very much for your time, Andrew.
Okay, great.
Really appreciate that.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks, Geoff.